of work since I was 14. And I started streaming this music that I was making into the games I was making. Met my co-founder and CTO, Wilfred, at Google, and we started looking at audio ads within games instead of streaming music. And then we stumbled upon this idea, which we're now scaling. So that's a bit about me.
Thanks, Christian. Well, first off, I think one of the burning questions is how do you how should founders think about if once they've gotten to the pre-seed and seed, and once they raise the seed, they're needing to figure out hiring and getting to the next stage. Oftentimes, we're not even thinking about the next round until certain milestones are hit. Would love to hear your side of, or your story of how you've approached each round and what you've learned along the way that's led you to this point.
So there's a couple of things. So the first thing is definitely shooting for the moon. So no matter what your MRR is, anything is possible. There are founders that had pretty much next to no revenue, such as ourselves during our seed, that were able to raise pretty sizable seed rounds. And back when I was training myself to become an entrepreneur that could figure out how to raise money, I basically went to a pre-accelerator or VC school, if you will. And one of the things that always stuck with me was as soon as you have closed a round, you effectively open another round. Now, I don't mean that in the formal sense, even though I've seen some startups do that. I mean in the sense that you should almost approach investors, VCs, and angels like you would a sales funnel. So if you're going to try and close a massive client like I don't know, a Warner Music or an Amazon or a McDonald's or something, that could take very well 18 months of closing a relationship through test deals through to something much larger down the line, and then a contract negotiation. So the reason I use that example is that as soon as we closed the seed round, we built into our website like an investor subscription list, and we accepted, and by we, I mean specifically me, because the team has other things to do. I started talking to investors at least 2 to 3 every single week until we raised our Series A. And it sounds like an exaggeration, but it's not. I spoke to investors. I accepted every single inbound. And while it takes a lot of time to do 2 to 3 hours a week to be spending on business development, the idea is that you just do a quick follow-up email, you ask for permission to put their email into your investor list on your website, and then you naturally capture inbounds anytime you do press. But you've also got a massive investor base that you build up. So as soon as you close a round, you should already be talking to investors about your next round, and also keeping the investors warm in terms of potentially doing a top-up round down the line, because you never know with the state of the world and how unpredictable it is. This does take a lot of time to do, and in terms of deploying your initial capital and kind of coordinating with your co-founder or head of people, HR, wherever it is, you definitely need to factor this in as a whole separate other line of activity as soon as you close a round, in my opinion, by the way. So, yeah.
So on that note, in terms of speaking with investors continually, how do you go about filtering, and who do you prioritize? Because obviously you're also running the business. You don't have time to talk to everyone that might be interested.
Okay, the reason I'm pausing is that there's many different schools of thought here. I would approach every single investor and not filter any of them out. So, talk to the family offices, talk to finance investors, talk to investors completely outside your remit, as well as the strategic ones. In terms of the strategic investors, so for instance, Supernode, MediaTek, Entertainment VC, really good seed stage VC. And you always knew that the VCs that would contribute to a potential Series B, C, D, or whatever it is, would be Makers Fund. So there is special attention paid to the VCs that you would want in your later rounds, such as, going to meet them in person, going to events, making sure that if you are to send a tailored update to one VC, it should definitely be your the VC that you want in your next round. So there are considerations to make there, but I would definitely prioritize speaking to as many people as possible. To give an example as to why this is, some VCs or non-strategic VCs that tend to follow on or tend to be more agnostic to the kinds of companies that they give term sheets to will technically be easy is the wrong word, but let's just say it takes less time to get a term sheet from a non-strategic VC in many cases than a highly strategic one that will add more value to your business. And if you can get, lots of follow-on VCs that are interested, if you find a lead in, investing in your startup, or if you get a lead that is non-strategic, this will be amazing leverage for you to walk into your next round. That's why you should talk to all of them. Outside of the fact that all the VCs, they do have a network, almost like back channeling is the wrong word, but they all talk to each other to help each other with deal flow. So the more you talk to, the more, I guess you could say, background traction that you'll get and more inbounds that you'll inevitably get for your next round as well.
That's super helpful. So you close the seed round and you're thinking, oh my gosh, I already have to have Series A on my mind, start nurturing these relationships. What have you found to be the right cadence of follow-ups and also the amount of information that you're sending and updating in terms of your progress? Have you, in addition to sending, say, your monthly updates or quarterly updates, did you go out of your way to set up meetings with these priority investors that you wanted to nurture relationships with?
In between rounds, not really. So we would do quarterly updates via our MailChimp account. And between rounds, we really wouldn't set up, go out of our way to set up a meeting, apart from the absolute key VC. So I know Makers Fund was a VC that we went out of our way to update outside of the quarterly updates. I'm not talking about every other month or whatnot, but every time we had like a key piece of news, for instance, we would try and use that in order to trigger a catch up. It took a couple of times, but we eventually did get a catch up call, which then aided to our round, which was like 6 months after that initial catch up. So yeah, we only went out of our way to schedule calls with the likes of Makers Fund. I think Axel was one of them, and I think like one or two other large VCs that we were targeting for our Series A/Series B.
And I'm curious, when you're raising your seed round, did you also connect with these potential Series A investors just to get on their radar, or was it really after closing the seed round?
Yeah, absolutely. So it sounds a bit daunting, but reflecting on the VCs that we've gotten on board and the relationships that we've built up, before I even considered becoming an entrepreneur and leaving Facebook, what was the name of the project? I can't remember the name of the specific project, but basically there's a venture capital project in Facebook. And this is when I was trying to figure out how to pitch to VCs. So I put myself into that project, and that initially got me access to Axel to start talking to their partner network. So the reason I give that example is that the VCs that you may want to talk to at Series B, C, D, or E, or whatever it is, you really want to talk to them as soon as possible. And I'm not talking about in terms of giving a traction update, but just saying, hi, this is what I do, and we're going to be on the journey of raising money and going through this normal startup life cycle. So yeah, during seed, we were already talking to many of the Series A startups, Series A VCs. So we were trying to talk to Boulderton and Index and Excel and Makers and pretty much all of them that we reapproached for our Series A.
And so being so early, you're not going to have traction to demonstrate. How do you even get the conversation started with these investors that are focused on later stage?
So there has been a massive trend. I saw it. It started back in this is when I got view of it back in 2019. So the largest funds, so your Series A, B to B funds, are looking at deal flow opportunities as early as humanly possible, even at the idea phase. And I actually first learned of this at Excel. So someone called Holly Bennett that flagged Wilfred as a future entrepreneur. And then I was invited into that circle as well. So the position is called ecosystem development. And since raising our Series A, even growth stage funds, M&A service providers as well, they are all looking at as early as possible to start developing these relationships. So it's not, I wouldn't say it's that hard in order to trigger an initial conversation. If you were going to approach cold, let me just think. So we stopped really the cold approach to these large funds. I'd say probably since the end of last year, since our Series A. But back when we were doing a cold approach, it was basically having your pitch down to 1 or 2 lines and any kind of traction point. So even if the idea is nascent, as VC say, just mention that you've got some initial interest, mention something like the total addressable market and the growth rate of that market, and that should trigger an initial conversation. I guess the caveat to that, and just like being very candid here, myself and Wilfred starting an ad network. We've worked at Google, Facebook, and then JP Morgan, Goldman Sachs, where Wilfred worked. And the ad tech ecosystem has evolved from the banking ecosystem. So the caveat I want to make is that we worked at very, very good companies. So it's definitely like VCs will believe what we say because we're experts in this area. So if you have the experience, or you have a narrative where you are absolutely maybe not the best founders to start a specific idea, the founder of Stripe wasn't, but you have a very specific plan and evidence as to why you can build up this idea, combined with the other points, the addressable market and whatnot. If you can put all of that into a succinct email, you should be able to get an initial conversation quite easily.
Great tip. So there's a few questions in the chat, starting from the top, from Sebastian or Gordon, I'm not sure. How do you tell the VC at that stage that you aren't raising?
So, and my answer would have been different if you asked me this back in, I don't know, Q1 2020. Operationally, you might not be raising, but every single VC that I approach, I always say that we are thinking about a top-up round, and it's not a case of kind of wiggling a carrot of value to the VC. It is absolutely true. I constantly prepare, not to worry, Gina, but I constantly prepare for a new COVID strain to take out a country or an economy. Like, we are literally preparing for the worst case scenarios, and that might sound like an exaggeration, but back in Q1, you train yourself for years to become an entrepreneur that can raise, then you raise, and the whole world shuts down. Like, these are the kinds of scenarios we're constantly preparing for. So every VC that I talk to, it's not, I never say, even operationally, if we're not, in fundraising mode right now, I always mention that we are considering a top-up round because we might always need it. So that's the approach I take with all of VCs. And if it's a case that, 6 months down the line, our revenue is improving, we can reinvest our profits and whatnot, and we decide, okay, we're actually going to be okay for the next 6 months, then yeah, we say we're not raising. But for 75% of the time, we're always considering a potential top up, because you never know what happens. Hopefully that answer helps.
Absolutely. You never know, given what we've experienced.
Yeah.
Next question, how do you avoid spending too much time talking to too many investors? How do you make the special ones feel special?
It's a really good question. So limit yourself to 2 to 3 a week if you're not operationally raising. Obviously, if you're going to fundraising mode, it should take up your whole calendar for most of the week, to be honest. And I can ask questions as to how that's possible down the line. To make the special VCs feel more special, be honest with them. We really want you in our future fundraising round. We think you're going to be of the most strategic value. We really want to build a relationship with you. Would love to have more catch-ups with you. Like, just be honest. Like, there's a VC that's really going to be of value to you. It doesn't put you in a worse position by letting them know that. Yeah, and on the flip side to that, I wouldn't tell another VC that is completely agnostic and not related to your industry that they're useless. I absolutely would not say that. But just keep them. Just mention that you'll keep them up to date, and you can actually even mention to them that being a gaming VC, we're targeting. Being a gaming startup like us, for instance, we are targeting VC X, Y, and Z, but we would love to keep you in the loop in case there's room. Just using that kind of positive language that you keep in the loop, keep them updated, etc. That makes the ones that are non-special to you feel respected, and of course the special VCs feel extra special.
Also, there was, I think, a question about the pre-accelerator that you mentioned earlier. Do you remember the name of it?
Yes. So this was years ago. It's called the NDRC. It's based in Dublin. Basically, after work hours, I would go to this VC school, and they'll just teach you the tricks of the trade in terms of getting to MVP status. So yeah, that was a really, really good school that I went to.
Is that an NDRC, all letters?
NRC, yes.
NRC. Okay, cool. Next question. Was Series A heavy on metrics in the pitch deck?
That's a very interesting question. Okay, I'm going to go into like a whole thing here that I found out at Series A. So when a VC is hard on the metrics, and from what I've learned, they haven't raised Series B yet, but from what I've learned, much later down the line, they're much more stringent on the metrics. But a typical strategy that a VC will employ is that if you go for X valuation, your valuation is probably going to be halved during that negotiation. And another common theme that I've seen is that a lot of VCs will mention to you that you can have a conversation about a Series A when you maybe get to 40K MRR or 100K MRR. And then what tends to happen is the MRR, there's a multiple that's put onto that to limit the valuation. Now, for some VCs that use that model, I've seen or read about startups where they've gone through the whole process and then they've exited, and it's fine from a founder, startup, investor, and LP perspective. However, when it comes to especially like AudioMob, we're a category owner and we're targeting unicorn status down the line eventually. When it comes to startups like us, it's very dangerous in order to have the conversation orient around MRR. Now, that's not to say that MRR was bad. It was actually very, very good. It's just that the IP that we have and the value over like an 8 to 10 year trajectory can't be reflected in a year's worth of MRR. So initially, we approached saying, okay, we've got 6-figure MRR, let's go for the raise. And then we noticed that the valuation was an MRR, almost like an accountancy valuation rather than a tech-based one that you'd get out of Silicon Valley. So what we did is we started talking to some VCs that said no, were actually really friendly, introduced us to their friendly contacts, and we started learning about basically Silicon Valley based startups. I'm sure you've all read of, the person that came out of Stanford that wrote an idea on a napkin and raised like 10 million with no revenue. I used to read about those all the time, and I knew it was possible. So I started looking into those kind of startups. And there is a way to shift from an MRR conversation to a IP-based valuation, which is what the whole of Silicon Valley is known for pretty much. And it's the idea that your IP, if you have the team and the capital to execute, validate the IP, build out and scale it over an 8 to 10 year period, is going to be worth billions and billions of dollars in value, rather than the fact that what you have built over the first, year or two has generated this, tranche of MRR, which is going to go upwards in a linear trajectory. That's not where the conversation has to focus. It has to focus on how you're going to scale out your IP and how the whole business is going to look in 8 to 10 years. That is definitely not going to be a multiple of your MRR. It's a multiple of your the perceived value of your IP. So that was a long answer, but it's quite a complex transition between it being an MRR conversation, which it started out to be, and then it switched to an IP conversation. And one thing that we noticed is that, and I just saw a note that storytelling is critical. Absolutely. Storytelling of not just the first, how you got here and what you're going to do over the next 3 years, is what you're going to do over the next 8 to 10 years. If you get that aligned, then your valuation will be more of an IP one than an MRR one. And again, that's why as soon as Makers Fund shifted their view to what our view was over a longer period of time, and then they offered a term sheet, then the offers just came flooding in. Hopefully that made sense.
Sometimes it just takes that one, right? And also with the storytelling, from what's happened with you guys, it seems like connecting the longer term vision with where you are now, and focusing on the category defining opportunity is really what helped expand these investors to think beyond the typical metrics or the accounting of the metrics to the valuation.
Yeah, exactly. And I remember the last slide that I added that helped us get us over the line. It was literally one slide, and our recommendation came from Wilfred, our CTO and co-founder. It was to add a slide of our, and I can't go into too much detail, but we're going to be launching an experimental lab this year. And it was to add the products that we're going to build out and how we're going to scale them over an 8 to 10 year period. Once that slide was added in and we concentrated on the longer vision of the business, that added a tremendous amount of value to the overall story and long-term vision. So I'd recommend that everyone should definitely do that.
Thanks, Christian. So moving on to another question in the chat. How do you make a really strategic shortlist of investors and get interest quickly for the right fit investors?
So that's a great question, and I actually remember you gave us this advice, Gina, when we started the raise after we finished the deck. So again, like a sales pipeline, you have your tier 1 VCs, your tier 2, tier 3, and then kind of non-strategic. The way that we picked our tier 1s is, so an example is, so AudioMob being an ad network, we have the game developers that we integrate our technology into to expose the ad. And then we have the advertising side of the business where we connect advertisers to the games so that they can buy their buy inventory and show their ads to the users of the game. So there's the ad platform, and then there's the technology that we plug into the game developers. So we had, I'd say, our first tranche of tier 1 investors were any investors that can help us get access to more game developers, because it's harder to strategically integrate into a game developer than to sell ads to an advertiser. And selling ads to an advertiser is still very hard at scale, by the way. So that's why Makers Fund was like our top tier VC. And then switching over to the advertising side of the coin, we then started looking at more ad tech oriented VCs and angels that might be able to connect us to very, very large clients like a Microsoft in order to help us form a strategic deal, or connect us to demand side partners. So a demand side partners, basically think of as a big tech platform and they buy lots of inventory. So connecting us to partners like that. So those were the first two kind of tier 1 VCs. And then the third tranche of tier one VCs is what I literally labeled in my CRM system as big money. So these are VCs that could follow on for an infinite number of rounds that you would just always want on your cap table at some point in your journey. So that's like an Index, an Accel, a Boulderton, a Sequoia, a Google Ventures, basically VCs with an infinite amount of money. So those were how we categorized the three tranches of tier one VCs that we went after first.
And in terms of getting intros for the right investors that you've prioritized, do you have any tips on, if you don't have a connection to them directly, how to go about getting those intros?
I'm sure everyone's tried LinkedIn. I would say LinkedIn is pretty effective, and it was effective back before, you know, AudioMob had all this press and this traction. However, every VC that says no, or you're too early, or maybe, you know, they'll invest down the line, always ask the VC, even if they say no, if they know anyone that is looking to invest in this sector or in a technology like yours or a company like yours. The reason this is very effective is that VCs and angels, they always help each other with deal flows, because you've always got to think of a VC as, you know, an entity just looking for somewhere to put their money to get a return. So they're constantly, you know, flinging deals all day long at each other to increase the deal flow. So that has been extremely effective. Like I remember during our seed phase or pre-seed phase, actually, you know, even if a VC says no, if you build rapport and they like you, they'll just send you 10 leads. That happened to us multiple times. So that's definitely very effective.
Speaking of angels, there's a question here from Raquel, working on raising a pre-seed and wondering if you have any suggestions for finding the first angels to invest.
I'm thinking back 2 years ago when we our most effective methods. I would say going to events is definitely effective, and I'm saying that now that we're kind of coming out of the pandemic. If there are any VC events, mixers, hackathons, anything of that sort, go to as many as humanly possible. Many of our initial angels, I think we even met Supernode because Wilfred did a 60-second pitch at an event, and then we started talking to the partner. And then Supernode said no, and then we came back later, and then they said yes. So that's the way that these things work. So going to as many events, mixers as possible in order to you know, talk to VCs and talk to potential angels. That certainly is very effective. I would say taking a numbers approach on LinkedIn as well. To find all you really need to do is go to the events, go to LinkedIn, and find one good angel. And one good angel will introduce you to like 10 of them. This happened to us multiple times. And the potential angel actually, Nzumbe Ufodike, invested in us, and he's our advisor as well. You really need to find just one good angel. Now, the angel could be in the form of an advisor. You know, advisors, they have many years of in-industry experience, which is why you want them to become an advisor. They tend to be successful in their positions and potentially have income in order to become an angel. So also looking from an advisory standpoint for potential angels, that also was very effective. Actually, come to think of it, I think two to three of our advisors actually did become angels after becoming advisors first. So that's also a good method.
Shifting, actually, just going back to a previous point, I just saw Maciek is asking, you said that MRR wasn't that crucial and it's worth shifting the focus to IP. What did you present as IP in your case?
Okay, so there are all the elements in our R&D lab, which I cannot disclose right now, but we've got basically a long pipeline, and we've got the know-how and the plan to build a pipeline of innovative products over 8 to 10 years. So we presented the high level on the deck and then put the rest in the data room, presenting the fact that, and again, there's certain things that I can't reveal, but let's just say our patent methodology we are very stringent on, and we mentioned this high level in the investment deck, and the strategy as to how, when, and what we're going to patent was put into the data room. So those were two key things that we added. In terms of the IP around the core products and what we're how we're making money right now, so that's the advertising platform and the Unity plugin. It's as simple as, just making sure that your business model is clearly aligned, how you're making money, and then making sure in the data room that the intellectual property, the technical plans, the examples of how the product works, all the components of how you've built what you've built, and proving the difficulty of what you've built, not just from a technological standpoint, but from an ecosystem standpoint, is very, very important. So I'll give you an example. Every VC is going to say, if you're in a tech space, what if Google builds it, or what if I don't know, Facebook builds it or something? That question is always going to arise. I see some of you laughing there, and that question is always going to come up, right? And the example of how to combat something like that is all around how is your IP defensible, right? So we've built a Unity plugin, and we built an advertising platform. Those were really, really hard to build. But let's face it, if Google chucks $1 billion and decides tomorrow, I want to completely copy AudioMob, then they're probably going to figure it out. However, realistically, is that going to happen? Absolutely not, because it's not just building the technology that the IP around the technology that makes it defensible. It's the fact that we had to analyze every single component of the technical chain of components to get an audio ad from an advertiser to a user. It's the fact we had to persuade each technology partner that our idea was viable. It was persuading the game developers, it was persuading the advertisers. So there's a whole kind of business development, relationship building, defensibility, which means that you could just churn out the product, but then there's no way that you can just pay someone to be persuaded on the value of your idea and that they're going to implement it into their business. So the way that we present the IP and then the defensibility around the IP is around the defensibility of the business case and not just the IP. And that all has to be hooked into the same narrative. And you're going to get questions as you try and do this that just concentrate on, what if someone else builds it? And again, if someone else was to build it, they would still have all those other business case issues. So you got to link the two constantly to create a compelling investment case.
As a follow-up to that, metrics and IP, is ARR more impressive than MRR to the VCs, you think? Sounds bigger.
We always used MRR, and we because we raised the Series A before we had our first year of complete revenue, because we scaled from like no revenue to lots of revenue very quickly in 2021. We used our current MRR and our projected ARR. We always used MRR and then just referenced the ARR. Some startups do it differently, but in our experience, yeah, we just reference the ARR really.
Maciek, as a follow-up, if your revenue comes mainly from advertising, how problematic has that been for investors? It doesn't sound like a steady flow of revenue. How did you convince the VC that this is not a deal breaker?
This is I can almost guess who may have asked that question actually. So that is that's a really good point. I'm gonna use a diplomatic answer because I don't want to upset some startups, but I have seen some startups that have used that have shifted their advertising model from something that is less Google-esque. So you get your money when you close the deal kind of thing, or you get a trade deal and then you gravitate towards filling that trade deal, i.e. delivering the amount of money that's promised in the deal, to something that is more reminiscent of a SaaS model. So all you can eat impressions. So you do a deal with like Disney where you say, okay, give me 100K a month and you get X amount of impressions to do what you want with. And what we found is that, and again, this isn't through experimentation because we're just never going to do that, but it's just through looking at other use cases, is that if you give someone either all you can eat impressions or cap their impressions, there is always money left on the table. So when it comes to the predictability of revenue, it makes a VC feel more safe because it's more SaaS oriented. But we've always got to think 8 to 10 year $billion picture here. There is a reason that Google doesn't use a model where they get everyone to subscribe to, I don't know, buying on Google ads or Facebook ads, and that is used as a pay on demand or pay as you go advertising service. And that is always going to lead to more money than generating subscriptions. Now, this whole kind of narrative, I would explain to a VC, again, to bring the story back to, and this is AudioMob's story, you know, we're seeing this opportunity as a Google-esque or Facebook-esque opportunity. And we just need to make sure that we execute, build the team up and scale enough that we can reach a critical mass of advertisers so that we can always almost expect the revenue. And that's also creating a narrative around small, relatively small roster of clients that we've gotten. How much have they respent? How often have they respent? And what's the churn rate? So concentrating on that and how many clients respend rather than trying to be dragged into kind of a why isn't your model a SaaS model kind of conversation. That's what we did. Oh, Jeannie just muted there.
Sorry, I'd like to shift it a bit back to your pipeline of investors and how you built momentum. You talked about continually, having the fundraising hat on, always talking to investors, prioritizing the ones that you really want. There's a question in the chat of, how many investors did you actually talk to before you got the term sheet? And was it, not that hard because you had nurtured these relationships along the way from, say, pre-seed or seed? If you can share a little bit more about how did you build that momentum when you got closer to the point of deciding you needed to raise or wanted to raise?
So a small part of me is tempted to say I just walked in and I persuaded them, but no, it was it was really, really difficult. So I'll go back to when we decided we needed to raise. So it was over the space of a week. We knew we were going to hit 100K MRR because a very, very big diaper manufacturer decided to 10x the amount they wanted to spend on an initial test, which led to more tests, of course. And when we knew we were going to get to 100K MRR, we already knew kind of what the sales narrative was going to be. So we literally decided, okay, we need to get a Series A collateral ready in 3 weeks. It was 3 weeks of sleepless nights and talking to Gina quite a lot, actually, to rechurn our deck. And then we knew we were ready. And it was just a case of really contacting and hitting up all of the different VCs that we had previously spoken to. Now, was it easy to get that initial conversation and say we're now thinking about raising a Series A? Yes, because of the initial conversations we had. But we had to speak to around, I'd say around 30 VCs, and these aren't tier 1 VCs. These are across the whole roster. I think we spoke to about 30 overall, and within 6.5, 7 weeks, that's when we got our firm's first term sheet.
Hopefully that answers your question, Jake. Feel free to add a follow-up if not. So there's another question. What do you say when VCs say things like, why is your MRR not higher? We need a minimum MRR or X before we invest.
Honestly, that's never happened. No, it's happened once, actually. So there's a VC that we spoke to when we got to 100K MRR. And they mentioned, would only really invest if your MRR went from, 0 to 1 million in the space of 18 months. So it's pretty punchy. But the valuation they would give would be in the high hundreds of millions, right? So I only recall that happening once. Every VC that we spoke to beforehand, we already knew, like, if we get anywhere near 100K MRR, they will have an actual conversation. So I'd say, if a VC mentions to you that your MRR isn't high enough, I'll definitely get the benchmark for what the MRR would need to be. Or is there a conversation to be had in terms of, if they're concentrating on, let's say, on 50K MRR and you need to get to 80 to 100K, let's say, it could be a strategy to, again, try and shift to an IP conversation, and the fact that if you show your trajectory of growth when you get to X amount of MRR, could you persuade that VC to just invest anyway at the given valuation or at a slight discount, if you can persuade the VC that you're about to get there? And the reason that is definitely a possible line of conversation is I always remember, I spoke to Index years ago, and they mentioned that they will even do Series A with startups at that 40K MRR, as long as they've seen a consistent trajectory and that they believe in the team. So yeah, I'll definitely try and either shift to an IP conversation or try and ask for the VC. Here's the growth. We are going to get to X. If you want to get in first, let's have a kind of a conversation around that. I'll definitely try and do that.
Aside from MRR, were there any other metrics or related expectations that investors shared with you in your initial conversations that they were kind of checking the boxes or looking for?
Outside of what we've discussed, things like number of clients. If you've got a let's say a test, I'll use an example, a test campaign from Warner. Warner is a company that's doing north of $10 billion a year in revenue, and they've got like hundreds of companies as subsidiaries, right? You can say that you've got 20 clients, let's say, for instance, but if 5 of those clients are multi-billion-dollar conglomerates, which creates a total addressable market that you can seed into, those are the kinds of things that VCs, that they may not initially ask you for, but they certainly love hearing that you've got clients like that. Some of the game developers that we've actually integrated into, we use that strategy, saying that we've got the conglomerate and then we just need to seed into the rest of the games. So that's a very, very powerful thing that you can say, because a 20K test, for instance, or a 10K test or whatever it is with a large client has exponentially more value in terms of the valuation of your company. Another thing as well that you might want to consider is, remember that a VC or an angel is always looking for a return. So if you have, and I really need to emphasize this, if you need to stick to a 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10-year narrative, and the fact that you aren't going to sell, actually, yeah, this is a good point. You are not going to sell within 3 years at what they call a mid-market valuation. So this is a question that I've gotten a lot. VCs are worried, or were worried, that we would sell at $300 to $400 million, which is what's considered a mid-market valuation. But again, we have 8 to 10 years worth of products. There is and this is outside the scope of this conversation, but there's a strategy that we employed of how we're going to raise to get to that goal. And we're constantly using the fact that there are billion-dollar companies or $20 billion companies that have used specific methods that we're using. The fact that we're we're trying to look more to the strategies that Hopin would employ for growth, rather than a startup that will spend 3 to 4 years and then just suddenly exit. So VCs want to know, truly, that you're in for the long game, and then you've got the story as well as the evidence and the plan to back that up. And the reason I'm giving this quite long example is that there's a strategy that was employed, and it's very logical. It's the fact that if you could potentially exit at hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars, or maybe even over $1 billion in 8 to 10 years, and a VC is being very touchy on the valuation, that might differ between, I don't know, 10 and 50 million pounds, for instance. if they give you a higher valuation and you can prove that you are in it for the long haul and you've got a plan to get to that 8 to 10 year vision, then the amount of money the VC is going to make at the end of the journey, based on the valuation, the differential in the valuation that they're going to give you, is really going to be inconsequential. So these are the kinds of things that you can show a VC that you're, outside of everything we've discussed, that you are absolutely in it for the long haul, and not just to say, here's a 3 to 4 year plan. And, we want to, go for an IPO down the line. Like, make sure you have products, IP, and a plan and a story as to how you're actually going to get there in 8 to 10 years. It doesn't have to be as detailed as, what you're going to do in your first 1 to 3 years, but you definitely need to have a story and a high level plan. VCs love to see that, and they probably don't communicate that enough, to be honest.
That's a really good tip. Moving on to a topic where I think a lot of founders already feel stretched. They have not enough hours in the day. Fundraising is very time consuming in addition to operating the business. Allison had posted a question about how did you do all of this investor relationship building while running the company? Along this topic, I think just in general, would love to hear if you've had to make any changes or change tactics, during the process based on what's happening in the business, or also what feedback you're getting from investors.
All right, so the first part of this answer is going to be unhelpful, but it's true, and I want to use it as a caveat, which is I have, excuse my French, a bloody phenomenal CTO and co-founder. Wilfred is, I think he's in the chat. He's phenomenal in terms of having the product knowledge, the management knowledge, and able to sell as well. He could be a CEO, and he was the CEO while I was full-time fundraising. So I was doing like 5 to 10% CEO responsibilities, and 90% was fundraising. AudioMob had an unfair advantage with the fact that we have a CTO and co-founder that was able to act as a CEO and that I could completely trust the business with, as well as our investors. And again, like, I'm just setting expectations, like, we definitely had an advantage. Now, if that's the case, that you may have a let's say a technical co-founder that perhaps hasn't been I don't know, skilled up on both sides of the business, that is something that you can definitely work with. What I would look at is making sure that do you have the skill sets of the CEO that could be divided amongst multiple people if your co-founder, for instance, may be lacking in some areas, whether that's management or HR or finance or whatever it is there a way that you can split the tasks so your CEO could pretty much full-time fundraise? That's definitely the first thing that you should be doing. If it's the fact that your co-founder might either be lacking in skills in some areas, or perhaps it's the fact that there needs to be a ramp up in some other areas of the business. I would even, delay the round for a couple of weeks or even 4 weeks, so that you can operationally set yourselves up in a way where you're able to go and raise. So yeah, Wilfred became the CEO, and when it came to the operational functions in terms of who was heading sales, I had a whole team call, and it was like, account strategist that was most senior was suddenly going to lead the junior account strategist and head up all the sales. Marketing division had to be autonomous. I almost presented it as a way for the more junior team members to test their autonomy while I was away raising. So I would say, yeah, setting yourself up operationally where the CEO can be almost a full-time fundraiser, that is absolutely essential, even if it takes you 3 to 4 weeks to kind of prepare the company to do so. Hope that answer somewhat helps.
I'm curious, how long were you a full-time fundraiser versus, say, part-time in addition to being CEO?
I would say I was in pitch mode. So for 6.5 weeks, it was like full-time pitch mode. And then I switched into legal mode for like 2.5 months. And then I started trailing back into becoming a CEO for the last like 3 or 4 weeks or so.
Thanks for setting those realistic expectations. Did you have to change tactic or pivot your strategy at any point during the process?
At the very beginning, when because I'm quite bullish when it comes to the way that I sell, so I will just sell to everyone as quickly as possible. And then you helped us hone in on the strategic targets first. So that was the first change that we made, and that was like a week into fundraising, and then we started. After the tier ones were done and those conversations were happening and they were reviewing our data room, then I went to the tier twos and the tier threes and tier fours, or the non-strategics. And then what I mentioned about adding in the moonshots and our R&D lab and more collateral in the actual deck, the front-facing deck on our long-term vision, that was the second major change that we made, and that was about 3 weeks in.
Did anything surprise you during the process that you didn't anticipate?
One of the key things that that surprised us was how quickly investors change their minds once term sheet comes in. So as a founder, it will be hell getting that first strategic term sheet. But once that term sheet comes in, it will be like the floodgates open. So that was very, very surprising. Like, it happened in our seed round, but we got like 20 million in offers, literally, when our first term sheet came in. And it was actually quite a lot of work going through all of the different offers to figure out, what strategic money we wanted to take. And that's why the round was so strong. That was definitely one of the more surprising things that happened on the positive side of things, definitely.
A good problem to have.
Absolutely.
Conscious of time, we just have a few more minutes. So I'd love to close by asking, what are some of the biggest lessons that you've learned from this experience, especially thinking about different rounds of funding that you've gone through? If there was any major takeaways that you'd like the founders on the call to think about and consider for their rounds?
Talk to as many VCs as possible, even if they're the ones that perhaps won't be the best fit for the company. Make sure that you operationally set up the company in the way where you are fundraising full time. It's really not preferred to have someone that fundraises for you. Like, the VCs want to talk to the CEO or CTO and co-founder, whoever your co-founder is. Another thing that I've just remembered is getting a non-strategic term sheet, like from a family office or something. That actually is worth its weight in gold, in terms of, if you go to and this is what we did. If you go to an initial strategic VC and there is already the expectation that if this doesn't work out, you have money that you can use to scale the company anyway, that is definitely a strategy I'd encourage you to employ, almost as a backup. So if everything goes wrong, you'll at least have a family office or a non-strategic VC that will or angel that will back you. That is incredibly useful, and I encourage everyone to almost put that at the front of their strategy in terms of trying to get an easy term sheet from non-strategic while talking to your tier ones. That for us was very helpful as well.
On that note, did you target these non-strategic VCs, or I'm sorry, investors immediately, or did it kind of enter your process midway through?
So I would say after we spoke to some of the tier ones, we also started speaking to or accepting chats with some of the non-strategics. And if we're going to call this like the tier 4 investors that you talk to, there's the tier 4s where there are investors that in general won't be the best fit for your company. And that could be from a perspective that perhaps I don't know, they're not an evergreen fund and their fund needs to close in 5 years, or the strategic direction of the fund might not align, or they might invest too many competitors. It could be something like that. Or you have the non-strategics where they're just purely family offices that are completely hands-off. They're like, here's the money, I want my return, and don't talk to me, kind of thing. So talking to, I would say that the more agnostic family funds while you're talking to the tier ones is definitely a helpful strategy. I would say though, if you're gonna divide your time, I'd say 80% tier ones, and while you're talking to them, 20% of your time should be with the family offices. That's what we did anyway.
Super helpful. Thank you so much, Christian, for sharing your learnings and tips and advice, and also tangible tactics there from your experience. And Wilfred, if you're still on, hi, thanks for joining, and thanks for all your hard work during that process as well. I know that Christian and Wilfred are hiring for a bunch of roles now that they've closed the round. So if you know of anyone who might be interested, I encourage you to take a look at their website and see those open roles. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me or Naomi as well as a follow-up. And wish you all a great rest of the week.
Thanks for having me. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks so
Thank
much.
you. Take care. Gina. Thanks, Wilfred.
Yeah, thanks.
You are there. Nice to hear your voice.